more knowledge and education about what we're doing, what we're experiencing as we go through that process to achieve that end result. That's great. Okay, secondly, it's better to be patient than proud. Second part of verse 8 through 10. Patience of spirit is better than haughtiness of spirit. Do not be eager in your heart to be angry, for anger resides in the bosom of fools. Do not say, why is it the former days were better than these? For it is not from wisdom that you ask this. So we've got up here, it's better to be patient than proud. Why is that? Okay. Pride goeth before a fall. Okay. Better to heed the rebuke of a wise person. In life, we have a lot of issues and challenges, don't we? And our patience is constantly being tested. And from that, hopefully, we grow, learn more patience, rely on our fellow Christians and our families, like, help me get through this. I got a challenge or an issue, and I need to be practicing patience. Versus pride. Pride is what? It's okay to be proud, but Solomon is using a different context here in self-pride. I can do it all on my own, right? I'm better than, fill in the blank. More relying on ourselves, right, than patience that God and others can help us with to give us strength. Charles. Mm-hmm. Charles said patience is important because oftentimes the situation will work itself out. And if we're prideful, then we may not realize that, and that may not take care of itself. The other thing is the impatience, bullet point up there, it can lead to a quick temper. We see that playing out, can't we? If we get really impatient, it's like things aren't working out. It's just, one of our emotions, that can be a step that we don't want to go to, is leading to a temper if we don't have patience. Right, very good. Said if we don't have patience, then we don't have that thought process. We immediately jump to other things. It's really good. He says, wisdom, like inheritance, is a good thing, but better. If we do have an inheritance in some form, or we pass on an inheritance, that's great if it's used for good purposes. But understanding how the inheritance came about, there's that's sober and reflection to think about how the inheritance was gained, because someone typically had to pass to do that. Solomon said that's a good thing. He had multiple children, multiple wives, and they were all vying for his inheritance, waiting for him to go on, I'm sure. He said that's fine. But wisdom, he among all people was one to say wisdom is better. Okay? Inheritance is usually in the form of assets, right? Cash, vehicles, homes, whatever. Things that are not going to stay around in a lot of cases. But wisdom, we can use that. And I think he was advocating to his family as well, is that whatever inheritance you're waiting on, you need to have the wisdom for it too, if not more so. He said it's good to exercise wisdom in the use of inheritance. And of course, having an inheritance without wisdom or a fortune without wisdom is a misfortune. There it went. Okay, avoid extremes. We'll look at verses 15 through 22. In this meaningless life of mine, I have seen both of these, a righteous man perishing in his righteousness, and a wicked man living long in his wickedness. Do not be over righteous, neither be over wise. Why destroy yourself? Do not be over wicked, and do not be a fool. And why die before your time? It is good to grasp the one and not let go of the other. The man who fears God will avoid all extremes. Wisdom makes one wise man more than powerful than 10 rulers in a city. There is not a righteous man on earth who does what is right and never sins. Do not pay attention to every word people say, or you may hear your servant cursing you. For you know in your heart that many times you yourself have cursed others. Point being is that, Solomon's saying he advised people just to avoid extreme situations. Kind of take it down the middle. Don't, be a part of any kind of extreme situation. He said one extreme is that, he has seen good people die earlier than he thought they should have, and he's seen wicked people live a lot longer. And he said those are extremes that they don't seem just, but that's the way life is. It was then. And he said that illustrated the uselessness of extremes. We need to get a good handle on life, he says in verses 18 through 20. So if we have trust and fear God, that wisdom will give more strength than 10 city leaders. So purportedly, the city leaders at that time had a lot of authority, knowledge. He thought they should have wisdom. But he said it is better that you have a good handle on life. And if you practice that, then that is better than 10 city leaders. And we'll talk about it a little bit later. He did his own research, and he had a statistic, which I thought was interesting, and we'll get to that in a minute. All right, verses 21 through 22, he said, don't overreact to evil reports. What do y'all think he meant by that? Don't overreact to evil reports. True. Yeah. So he tells us, and I'm sure he heard it a lot himself, people criticizing him, saying bad things about him. We may have encountered that. We may hear people say such things. Gossiping, trying to bring us down or take down a reputation for whatever reason. He said, don't listen to that. Don't overreact to it. He said, because if that's happened, then possibly in our own life, we have been guilty of that too. We have said something, maybe unintentionally, to bring someone down. Gossiped a little bit, said something. Hey, I heard this about so-and-so. He said, be careful of that. And that's one of the extremities he's talking about. It's an extremity that people talk badly about us, as I'm sure he was thinking, yeah, people talk bad about me being the king. He said, but on the other extreme, well, let's be careful. We read through the Bible, about how great and how rough and terrible the tongue can be. So we have to be careful of both of those extremes. Steve?
There's an old adage that says, consider the source.
Yeah.
That's part of that too.
Yeah.
About where does it come from? That makes a difference on whether or not you listen to it or pay attention to it or not.
Yep. Yeah. Practice kindness for sure. Yeah, that kind of follows what Steve says. Considering the source today. In fact, thank you for bringing that up. I was thinking while I was going through this lesson is that in his day, social media was a tablet, right? You had a clay tablet and the mouth. Today, for better or for worse, we have all access to all this social media, and people can put something out there, and it spreads like wildfire. And it may be partly true or not true at all. So Sister Peggy's saying, yeah, be careful with that when we read that, is that, what is the source of this? What's the intention of this? Who's it helping or who's it hurting? Right. He says Charles says if it's repeated often enough, people will tend to believe it. That's just human nature, right? Again, that's an extreme that Solomon is telling us to be wary of. Okay, learn to apply wisdom. Verses 23 through 29, and then we'll go into chapter 8. All this I tested by wisdom, and I said, I am determined to be wise, but this was beyond me. Whatever wisdom may be, it is far off and most profound. Who can discover it? So I turned my mind to understand, to investigate, and to research out wisdom and the scheme of things, and understand the stupidity of wickedness and the madness of folly. How often have we heard stupidity of wickedness? I find more bitter than death the woman who is a snare, whose heart is a trap, and whose hands are chains. The man who pleases God will escape her, but the sinner she will ensnare. Look, says the teacher, this is what I have discovered, adding one thing to another to discover the scheme of things while I was still searching but not finding. I found one upright man among 1,000, but not one upright woman among them all. This only have I found, God made mankind upright, but men have gone in search of many schemes. Who is like the wise man, who knows the explanation of things? Wisdom brightens a man's face and changes its hard appearance. A lot to look at here in these verses. He's saying basically to keep life right side up, we need to make sure we're listening to God and following His commands. He admits, he determined that the wisdom that he had, this is probably later in his life, he's looking back going, yeah, I had all the wisdom in the world, but I really didn't practice it like I should. He's trying to teach us that, he says, it's remote and exceedingly mysterious. Who can discover it? Well, we discover wisdom through God. And oftentimes, he admits he did not practice that. And then he says he discovered that to be wise, he implied it as he should. And a bad woman can be one of life's biggest evils. We have to think about Solomon's life. We read in Kings that was a major weakness of his. That's 2 bullet points down. And we'll talk about that here in a second. This is the research I alluded to earlier. Through his life, he said that there's probably 1 in 1,000 men that he considered wise. Don't know where his data came from. He was purportedly the wisest man in the world at the time. And I assume through his interactions and seeing people in his kingdom, that was his conclusion. 1 man in 1,000 was wise. Don't know. That may be right. That's just his statement. I thought that was pretty interesting. Any thoughts on that? Yeah. And that's where we get to. We have to look at it in context. And that's the next bullet point. He said, women were a major weakness of Solomon. But if you look at 1 Kings 11, he came to that conclusion because of his own fault. What did Solomon do that displeased God? Right. Yeah. Who was he surrounded by in terms of women? Foreign women, right? You look at 1 Kings, right? God told him, said, don't have foreign women around you because they're going to influence you. They're going to take you away from me. And that's exactly what happened. Yeah, exactly, yeah. So when he says that, we have to look in context, is that he surrounded himself by people that God said, do not do this. And so when he's looking around going, I don't see anybody wise, and I don't see men that are wise. Look at who he surrounded himself by. And God was very displeased at that, because not only were these people, and these women in particular from foreign countries, influencing him, they in turn, by influencing him, were influencing his policies and his programs, which were diminishing the influence of Israel as God's chosen people. So I have to look at that in context when it said that was a major weakness. Well, it was his own fault. Charles? Yeah, he did. Yeah. Yeah, for sure. And verses 8 through, any commentary on that? Thoughts? Okay. Verses 1, chapter 8. Who is like a wise man who knows the explanation of things? Wisdom brightens a man's face and changes its hard appearance. How does wisdom brighten a face? Yeah. We have a better idea of things if we practice wisdom, if we let God take over our lives and influence our actions and our direction. And that's something that I thought, by Solomon saying, is that this actually happens. You can see someone's expression change. You can see someone of faith handle things differently than the hard appearance as Solomon is talking about.
The wise person is not going to be so judgmental.
Good. Charles says the wise person is not going to be so judgmental. We can have an expression of that, right? Just in our look. That changes how we look. Right. Right. Right, exactly. Yeah. Judgment based on his word. Yeah. Yeah, mercy is definitely a big point of that. So some interesting thoughts there that we should be looking at. I saw a quote, "The beauty of the Lord will shine through him to others." I think we can see that and we can practice that. But we have to be, careful about our expression and how we look, because others see that. And I thought that was nice. Shine through him to others. Here's an interesting one. Submit to governmental authority. Solomon is just going in different directions in these two chapters. He's talking about wisdom and expressions and how we need to be practicing that, and how people can see how we look by, whether we're following God's guidance and being wise or not. And then he just takes a 180 and now he's talking about governmental authority. It's like he's just throwing everything in here that's coming to his mind, it sounds like. So we see if you look at chapter 8, verses 2 through 17, we'll go through that. Obey the king's command, I say, because you took an oath before God. Do not be in a hurry to leave the king's presence. Do not stand up for a bad cause, for he will do whatever he pleases. Since a king's word is supreme, who can say to him, "What are you doing?" Whoever obeys his command will come to no harm, and the wise heart will know the proper time and procedure. For there is a proper time and procedure for every matter, though a man's misery weighs heavily upon him. Since no man knows the future, who can tell him what is to come? No man has power over the wind to contain it. So no one has power over the day of his death. As no one is discharged in time of war, so wickedness will not release those who practice it. All this I saw as I applied my mind to everything done under the sun, There is a time when a man lords it over others to his own hurt. Then too I saw the wicked buried, those who used to come and go from the holy place and receive praise in the city where they did this. This too is meaningless. When the sentence for crime is not quickly carried out, the hearts of the people are filled with schemes to do wrong. Although a wicked man commits 100 crimes and still lives a long time, I know that it will go better with God-fearing men who are reverent before God. Yet because the wicked do not fear God, it will not go well with them, and their days will not lengthen like a shadow. There is something else meaningless that occurs on earth, righteous men who get what the wicked deserve, and wicked men who get what the righteous deserve. This too, I say, is meaningless. So I commend the enjoyment of life, because nothing is better for a man under the sun than to eat and drink and be glad. Then joy will accompany him in his work all the days of the life God has given him under the sun. When I applied my mind to know wisdom and to observe man's labor on earth, his eyes not seeing sleep day or night, then I saw all that God has done. No one can comprehend what goes on under the sun. Despite all his efforts to search it out, man cannot discover its meaning. Even if a wise man claims he knows, he cannot really comprehend it. Again, a lot of information here. He's saying an order from a king, so he's talking to his subjects here. An order from a king should be taken seriously as a promise to God. What do y'all think about that? Uh-huh. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Right. At that time, if they lived, and of course we see in the Old Testament how many kings and judges were wicked. They did not follow God. And it was a constant frustration. And some would follow God and fall away. And Solomon sure did that too. So the wise man who has the priorities right side up will not be rebellious, but will follow the governmental authorities. And there's other scripture that tend to back that up. Romans 13:1-7 says submission to civil authority is important. So we see that for sure. And then Matthew 22:21, the very famous story, which have a coin. Who's on the face of the coin? It's Caesar's. And Jesus said, so give back to Caesar what is Caesar's and to God what is God's, in regards to taxation and things of that nature. And he says one of the most useless situations was a king who ruled as a tyrant. So totally opposite. So we see that. We saw it then, and we see it now in people who abuse their authority. Steve?
The rationale that Paul gives is that the reason we obey civil authority is because there is no authority except that which comes from God. So
right.
All authority ultimately flows from God. That's why children obey their parents, students obey their teachers, etc. That's because that's God's chain of command.
Yeah. We have to have civil order in society, and that's the way our democracy and our republic was established to give us certain rights and freedoms, but also ensure that everybody else's rights and freedoms are taken care of as well. I made a note here that when he says one of those situations is a king who ruled as a tyrant, and that's something he was aware of. He saw other kings ruling as tyrants. Certainly in Israel, kings and judges practice that as well. And we see that through history. I mean, we can just go through history and talk about people who were tyrants. They were totally oppressive to their people. And even today, we can look at certain nations and we can just read the paper. The two that come to mind now are the biggest ones are China and Russia. Certainly, the Hortons can tell us about situations because we've been there. The situation in Nicaragua, where it seems to become that families just pass on their dictatorships to family members. And the situation in Nicaragua is terrible, as it is in Venezuela and other places. And that would be places that we can relate to that Psalm would say it is useless and meaningless to do that. God's given you the authority to have a government to take care of your people if you are given that position. And these governments and these dictators are certainly not doing that as they should. So, have just a couple of minutes. What we can be sure of, there's two things. We see that in verse 12. A sinner can do many wrongs, enjoy life for a while, but faithful will end up doing the best. That kind of goes back to what we earlier talked about. The end result is better. And Solomon saw it in his day, and we can see it in ours, is that, we see people who just do anything they want, whatever they want, and here we are in the trenches day by day, going at it, keeping our head down, praying, challenging ourselves, trying to help others, and we see others just doing whatever they want, and we know they're not living the right life. Solomon said, it's okay. Because look, in the end, we will be better in the end. Because we have tried to do what God asks us to do. And then following in verse 13, it will not go well for sinners who do not turn to God. So we have to understand that, we do what God wants, but we have to understand that it won't go well. Solomon tells us this. Christ told us this. The apostles told us this. Is that there is a definite warning. He admitted life in verse 14 didn't seem fair sometimes, and it's meaningless. He uses that a lot. Life can be meaningless sometimes. And that point is, it doesn't seem fair. It seems like it's meaningless, but everything's going to work out. And then verse 17, wise man who thinks he knows, but does not know all of God's purposes. There again, I think Solomon, towards the end of his days, is raising his hand saying, yeah, I'm supposed to be the wise one. I thought I knew everything, and then God is revealing things to me that, I did not know that. Of course not. We have to be wise and, follow God's guidance in everything we do and read His Word and pray and practice, everything. But we can't know everything. God will reveal to us what we need to know. The conclusion of the matter, to quote Solomon, those who have life turned right side up are those who choose God's priorities. Okay, and then lastly, those who are godly will trust God to know what is best. Okay? Any thoughts, comments, remarks? That was the final bell. All right, great. Thank you for your attention. Happy New Year's again. Be well, be safe. God bless.